Welcome to the Nurturing Greatness podcast. If you are completely satisfied with the education landscape as it is today, this podcast is not for you. But if you're ready for a change and you're motivated to disrupt the current system, keep listening. This podcast will explore what it truly means to cultivate brilliance in ourselves, in our students, and in the systems we lead. I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I'm Dr. Erika Leak. Together through the Nurturing Greatness movement. Yes, this is a movement. We are committed to high expectations, asset based leadership, and creating environments where every single learner, all of them, are seen and challenged and affirmed. In each episode, we'll sit down with leaders, educators, and change agents who are committed to doing the deep work of transformation, right? Because we know that this doesn't happen in a year. This doesn't happen in 2 years. This is a movement. It happens, it takes time. It happens over time. And so today, we have none other than us.
That's
Dr.
right.
Tonya, yes, Dr. Tonya and
We are
Erika.
kicking this, we are kicking this podcast
Yes,
off.
we are.
And so today we don't have any special guests because we are launching this podcast and
Yep.
we are excited to launch it because we know who's coming up in the sessions that follow. And we are
Yes.
excited, and you are going to be in for a treat every time you listen in or watch us. There's going to be something that will speak to you as an educator or as a parent who wants the best education for their children. So
Yes.
stay with us. We're going to kick this off with some questions. And these are like basic questions that we're going to ask all of our guests each time they come on with some variations. But we figured if we're going to ask other people these questions, we might as well ask each other those
Yeah.
questions.
That's
So,
right.
Dr.
That's right.
Erica, it's your turn. When you hear the phrase nurturing greatness, what does it mean to you in practice, not theory? What does it mean to
Okay.
you?
So when I was in high school, they had this club called the Number One Club. And certain kids would get nominated for the Number One Club, and they tended to be the kids who were like really doing great things anyway, whether it was student council or, sports or even academics. And so for nurturing greatness, I think about the Number One Club. So those kids were groomed. They really were. They were groomed. They would be the ones that the teachers would say, like, I have this opportunity for you, and they would be the ones that the teachers would sort of push forward and, hey, like, think about this, like these kinds of things. That's what nurturing greatness to me is. Now, unfortunately, they only did that with certain kids. The rest of us was like, good luck, whatever you're going to do. But for me, nurturing greatness is every kid gets in the Number One Club. Every kid gets the opportunity to realize greatness, to realize their full potential in an area or several areas. That's what it means to me in practice. It's literally an invitation to your own greatness.
I love how you phrased that. That was wonderful. No, really, seriously, that was really good. I was like, oh, wow. And we've been friends for a long time, and
Yeah.
I've never heard you talk about that. So that was
Mm-hmm.
that was great.
Thank
Spot
you.
on here.
Yeah, okay. What about you? What about you? When you hear the phrase nurturing greatness, what does it mean to you in
So
practice?
can I say ditto? No. Um, oh no, really, when I think about nurturing greatness, I really think about a strong belief that I have and have held for many years from the time I was in the classroom, starting back in the late 90s, up till now. And that is that every child is brilliant, every
Mm-hmm.
one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to us as the educators to help the student discover that brilliance and to nurture and to cultivate it. So now I can think back on some of my schooling experiences. And I was a kid who was identified as like gifted and talented, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
I had children who were gifted and talented. And I know the same for you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I remember what was different about when I was in the gifted and talented program, say in elementary school. We did things that nobody else did in the school. Nobody else did it. We went camping. We, had these experiences and opportunities to really kind of cultivate our interests. We did project-based learning way before anybody ever knew there was a such thing. as project-based learning. We were doing research and we were, learning about who we were. There were a lot of things that we were doing as kids in this gifted and talented program. Ours was called ESP. It was so we had extra
Okay.
sensory perception.
Okay.
Right.
ESP.
Yeah, we were coding computers and this was in the
Mm. The
70s,
eight. Okay.
80s? No,
80s.
80s.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Wow.
and right, right, we were coding. And so nobody else was doing these things. We had opportunities and they really were cultivating like our genius.
Hmm.
And I just feel like every child should have an opportunity for their genius to be cultivated because quite honestly, they're all born with these gifts and these talents and
Yeah.
abilities. So,
Yes,
yeah,
they
so that's what
are.
it is to me.
You know what? So that actually leads us into our next question. Just that last statement that you made that everybody's born with with the genius and these capabilities. So, what's one belief about students or leadership, or I'm going to add even the system, right? That we must release if we are serious about transformation.
I think kids, some schools have started doing this, but it still kind of happens subtly, and that's tracking.
Mm,
And, maybe they don't call it tracking, but they've got remedial courses and
yeah.
basic courses and college prep courses, and then you got
Mhm.
honors and AP. And we know from research that if you put an average and I'm using quotes here because I don't really believe that kids are average, but if you put an average student in an honors or an AP course, they are going to fare better
Mm,
than if they were not in that honors and AP
yeah.
course,
Hmm.
which tells us a lot. It tells us when we have the kind of rigor and high expectations for students, they are going to rise to
Absolutely.
the occasion.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we've got to get rid of these like mediocre courses or these mediocre expectations. We've got to release that if we really are going to cultivate and nurture the greatness that's inside of every child. What about
Yeah.
you? What do you think?
I think one of the things that we have to release are our rigid and inflexible practices around discipline.
Oh, yes.
I just think I think when kids are out of the classroom, they are out of the classroom.
Right.
When we kick them out or suspend them or put them in internal suspension or whatever we do that takes them away from instruction, it's damaging. It to me it's almost violent. It's like
Yeah.
how dare you take this kid out of this environment that he has a right to or she has a right to or they have a right to? How dare we do that? And I
Hmm.
think we just have these really sort of inflexible notions. I also think that we need to really we need to stop separating discipline from, strong relationships with kids and student engagement in the classroom. Like
Say that.
there's a relationship, right? When you have discipline issues, there's either an issue with the relationship with the teacher or even student engagement. Like
Right.
how rigorous and how relevant is it, what they're learning. And if it's and maybe it's rigorous but it's not relevant, or maybe it's relevant but it's not rigorous. Whatever it is, it's on us to figure out how do we connect with this kid so that there isn't a discipline issue. So I just think we have these really sort of antiquated notions around behavior and discipline that we must release.
Oh
It's
my
time.
goodness.
It is time.
You have said something that has hit a nerve, and I would talk more about it, but I really want you to kind of just push a little further with just that, you know, high expectations. So, because
Mm,
both of us kind of touched on high expectations, but
yeah,
when you think about high expectations and what it looks like without harm, so now you
right.
brought up this discipline issue, which we know can be harmful. We also know this discipline issue is disproportionate.
Hmm.
And so there are students who are identified and referred more than other students. And typically they're students that look like us
Yep.
and they are boys.
Yeah.
And so that's one issue, that's one challenge here.
Hmm.
But what
Hmm.
does high expectation look like to you without harm?
Yeah. So my favorite phrase in all, or probably my favorite, the word isn't label. I'll say phrase. My favorite phrase in all of education is warm demander.
Mm,
So high expectations to me, and it's an old phrase. Like I think there was like a study in the 70s or something like that, or the 80s, and we've had that phrase. But for me, it has been sort of my go-to when I think about high expectations, because the warm demander is just that. I am demanding that you meet this standard, but I still have the warmth, right? That will nurture you into being able to meet the standard. So you may not be there yet, but I know that you can do it. I love you, right? I
hmm
have high
hmm
expectations of you. I believe that you can. I believe in you, and I'm going to do everything I can, right? Whether it's, sort of demanding more or even pulling back and saying, let's scaffold you into meeting this standard or this expectation, but I'm going to nurture you into your greatness. That's a
Yes.
warm demander. That's what we
Yes.
do.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what high expectations look like without harm. What about you?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to just kind of just respond because recently you and I were watching the Marva Collins story. So I don't
Yes.
know how many people are familiar with Marva Collins. She was a Black educator in Chicago who was very frustrated with the school system and how children in in the urban area, and
Mhm.
at that time they called it the ghetto,
Yeah.
but in the urban area was performing
Hmm.
and existing in the school system, and she had very high expectations for her students. And while chaos was going on around her, in other classrooms or in the hallway, in her classroom it was different.
Yeah.
The
Hmm.
expectations that she had for her children were really high. And one of the things that I really appreciated, I mean, there were areas where I could critique some of her work. However, something that I appreciated about her work was that she believed all of her students could
Yeah.
perform at high levels. So as soon as her 5-year-olds learned how to add and subtract, she was teaching them multiplication and division. She wasn't waiting for them to be third and fourth graders. She's like,
Right.
hey, let me just capitalize on your learning and teach this to you. Her 5-year-olds were learning Shakespeare. I
Hmm.
didn't learn Shakespeare till high school. And it
Yeah.
was it was in my AP English class, so I don't even know what they were doing in the college prep class,
Right.
but we weren't exposed to Shakespeare before, um,
Yep.
AP English. But these children at 5 and 6 and 7 years old were reciting Shakespeare. They understood what was going on. I mean, she had
Mhm.
these high expectations. Now
That's
they
right.
didn't have recess, so that would be the harm for me. Like if I think
Mhm.
about the harm, I still think children need to play, and a lot of learning
Sure.
comes from play, especially
Right.
the younger you are. But everybody needs a break. Adults need breaks. So
Yeah.
that would be an area where I would, critique
Hmm.
her. So yeah, certainly the academics and the high expectations are very high, but I also think there's room for, especially in, as Black people, we tend to be more collectivists. And so opportunities to collaborate and to
Hmm.
connect with one another is really important, not just
Yeah.
academics. It's got to be, I would say a good balance between.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were thinking about one of the things I thought about, because there's this great sort of video, it's on YouTube that you can see. It's like a brief 30-minute documentary about her. Um, but one of the things you saw constantly was her affirming her
Yes.
students. Even when they thought they couldn't do it, she would affirm them, affirm their intelligence, affirm their capacity, affirm the way they looked. And even when they acted out, she would affirm them and say, because I know your brilliance, because I know,
Right.
your capacity, I will not allow you to continue this behavior, right? And so
Exactly.
that's the high expectation. It's like I'm demanding more,
Hmm.
right? I'm demanding more because I know that you can provide more. I know that you can
Right.
do more. And I
Right.
think sometimes when kids sort of, fall short of whatever mark that we have, as educators, we are literally taught in college to give a test, divide kids based on what they know or don't know, more likely what they don't know, teach to them, put them in a group according to what they don't know, right? And then, teach the other group what they don't know, that kind of thing. And then maybe put them back in the whole group. Like we are literally taught to look for what they don't know. We are literally
Right.
taught to look for deficit
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
rather than to really sort of interact with the strengths that they come with. Like that's something that I think we have all, like I had to learn to do that because that was something that was not taught to me
Right.
as a student teacher. And so even as an early service teacher, and so I think so what happens is you don't really get to the place where you use their strengths to get to the high expectations, right?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
all about filling in these deficit gaps,
Right.
which,
Right.
do you want to be, do any one of us want to be categorized by what we don't know or can't do?
That's
What
correct.
kind
No
of
one wants that.
no one wants that, you know what I mean?
No.
Like, so those kinds of things. So I think, I do think that's what it looks like to have like high expectations, and we have to start there.
Yeah, we absolutely
Yeah,
have to start there.
yeah.
I'm reminded of a story or an experience that I had as a classroom teacher. I've been out of the classroom for some time now, but I was teaching fourth grade, and the assignment, and I can't remember the project that they were working on, but the end product was going to be a 20-page PowerPoint. And to me, it was, that was not a big deal at all. They absolutely could do it. I knew that they could. I was going to support them in doing it. But do you know, I had a parent to come in to complain that, that was too high of an expectation for her child, and that, that was more like graduate study expectations. And I'm
Yeah,
like, these kids can do it. Like,
yeah,
they can absolutely do what you teach them to
yeah.
do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
if you believe that they can learn it, what do you think they're going to do?
Yeah.
Learn it.
Learn it.
You know, right? They're going to learn it. So when you think about the practices that we have as educators and or leaders, um, what is something that an educational leader or an educator working in the classroom with students could do tomorrow that really would shift the culture?
Tomorrow.
Eh.
There are a few things, but the one thing when I think about doing tomorrow, I think immediately institute, s- I guess, two things: small groups and differentiation.
Yeah.
I, 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 I don't know how, I don't know of anything that made more of a difference in like instructionally than small groups and differentiation. One, differentiation required me to know my students. So that means I had to build relationships so I could know how to differentiate. And
Hmm.
the other thing is small groups, which helped me to know my students even more, because I was
Absolutely.
sitting with them in small groups. I think
Yeah.
small groups and the small groups will help you with differentiation.
Right. Right.
So
And it
I
can be
think
done at every level. Every level.
every level,
I mean,
every level
when
for
I taught,
every topic, for every subject.
yes, I
Yeah.
agree. When I taught
Hmm.
kindergarten, I literally had 10 centers happening at one time. If there were 20
Hmm.
kids in the classroom, there were two per center. If there were 26 kids in the classroom, there were 13 centers happening at one time. And
Hmm.
once they learned how to work in them and work independently, which 5-year-olds can work
Yes,
independently,
they can.
and they can do it for 30, 40, 60 minutes even at a time, maybe
Yes.
rotating through the centers.
Hmm.
And I can now work with small groups of students,
Hmm. Hmm.
while they are independently working and learning and growing together. That was something I did. but I also did it in middle school. When I taught middle school, I taught both. I taught middle, I taught kindergarten.
God bless you.
Exactly. But I did the same thing in middle school. None of my peers were doing that. And then
Mm,
when I was in fourth teaching fourth grade, same kind of thing. It was always about differentiation. You could walk
mm,
into my classroom on any given day, especially when I was a fourth grade teacher, and not know exactly what was happening because you would see kids everywhere in the room. Some were on the floor, some were on the carpet, some were at the computer, some were at a small desk, some were listening to something. Some were talking somewhere off. You had no idea what was happening until you
yeah.
stopped and asked the children what they were doing. And
Hmm.
they could tell you what they were doing, but they had menus that they followed every day and they had choice. And
Mm,
so, because they had choice, there were things that they were required to do, but then there were things that they could choose to do to either reinforce the skills or reinforce, concepts that we were learning in the classroom. And we did this in not just in like English language arts, but we did it in social studies. I
hmm.
didn't teach math and science, but it was something that could be done at all levels. But when I was a principal, this was something that I and a vice principal, I really try to support teachers in creating differentiated classrooms because I understood the power of differentiating. Like now, there's a big thing about personalized instruction. That's really what differentiation is all about. It's about
Sure. Yep.
personalizing that instruction based upon the needs and the skills of your students, but never lowering the expectation.
That's right.
But just supporting them in a different way, giving them what they need so they can rise.
Hmm. I love that. And I think, I mean, imagine how much more just interesting school would be
Right,
if this
right.
was the approach. Years ago, when I worked for a state education agency, there was an author, researcher, his name was Grant Wiggins.
I
And one of
remember
the,
Grant
yeah,
Wiggins. I've I've
yeah,
I've seen him. I've been in person
yeah,
with him. Yeah,
yeah. One of the things he said at one of our meetings is that one of the huge barriers to learning for most American students is the excruciating boredom that they encounter. Like school is just boring for a lot of kids. I mean, then and think about us. Like, yes, there are things that we've had to, in college that we may have, or some other, um, environment that may have been boring and we've had to endure it. But for kids to go to school day in and day out and not be engaged and not have, lessons that spark their curiosity. Kids are naturally curious. So
they are.
why aren't we capitalizing on that in schools through these differentiated experiences? Why
Right,
why aren't we
right,
doing that? Tonya, you and I have the privilege of, doing walkthroughs in schools, and we've been doing that for the past few years. We just go in and observe and you know, whatever the other, usually it's talk to an administrator about our findings or write it up.
right.
And one of the things we see consistently is a lack of engagement. I
Hmm.
mean, it is almost like epidemic. Like, I don't even really know how else to describe it. And so, what does it look like for us to just say, like, how many different ways can we teach this concept?
Right,
How
right,
do
right.
I how do I reach my creatives? How do I reach my linear thinkers? How do I reach the kid, that, loves sports? How do I reach like there are all the how do I reach the musical kid? How do I reach them in different ways? And how much better is it to reach the kid that loves all of that? Right?
Yes,
Like, and now
yes.
I've got all these different ways to interact with this concept. How layered is that learning and how nuanced
Right,
is that learning?
right.
And it's just and the truth is, as a teacher, yes, it will take more to kind of set it up,
Plan.
but and
Hmm.
that planning is going to take some time. But once you get in that groove, what you realize is that when the kids are in the space with you,
That's
it's
correct.
actually an easier time with them.
Is.
It
And it
much
takes a lot
easier.
off of you
Yes, it does.
because
Yes, it
now the
does.
kids are doing what they enjoy
Yeah.
doing. So, if for me, when I was in the classroom and it was really important for me to know my kids, so that relationship was really critical.
Yes.
so that if they enjoyed music or if they enjoyed acting or art, that was going to be some of the product that they
Right.
were going to produce
Absolutely.
to show me their understanding of whatever content they were learning. So I think about, I've shared this story with you and I've shared it with other audiences. But when I was a kid, I was a talker. Surprise, surprise, right? But I was always talking, blah 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 all day long, to the point where the teachers would write in my report card, Tonya talks too much. And it wasn't like seen as a gift or as something that could be cultivated. Like there weren't opportunities that teachers were making for me as someone who loved to communicate orally. They just shunned it,
Yeah.
and they made me
Mm,
feel like it was a bad thing. Like,
mm,
and I don't have a voice, and
right.
what I have to say really doesn't matter. And that is not nurturing greatness. If they were nurturing greatness in me, they would have said, "Ooh, we have a student here who is an orator. We
Mm,
need to create opportunities for this
yeah.
orator to be able to speak." They
Mm,
never did that. They never thought to do that.
wow.
And not only for the orator, but for any other student who had other gifts. When we're cultivating greatness, we are identifying and learning more about the gifts that the students have because they are
Yes.
born with gifts.
Yes, they
And
are.
now we're cultivating those gifts. We are quick to like shun someone who is outspoken, not understanding they may be an advocate. And
Hmm.
if they are an advocate, how do we capitalize? Not even capitalize, because that sounds kind of transactional, but how do we cultivate the advocate in that student? Is there something that we can give them? Are there opportunities we can create for them? And yes, there are. We just don't do that.
Right.
We kind of, I don't know, we're rote in many
I
ways.
I know. I do think it's the influence of testing, right? And so testing says we've got to cover, and I hate the word cover, but we have to
Oh, I
cover
hate it
so
too.
much, material by the test. But I will tell you that my perspective was and still is that if my differentiated lessons are rigorous enough, my kids will not have a problem with the test, and they didn't.
I
You know,
agree.
so
I
if
agree.
if I if
Same.
if I have if my approach is requiring critical thinking and analysis of complex texts, and where kids have to, identify the nuance and then, you know, um, you know, provide a product or something like, or a response or whatever that is, if that is at the level where it should be, my students will never have an issue with the test. And they did not. And so, I never did test prep because I actually think that's unjust, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah,
But we
yeah.
will,
That's that's
that's
another
another,
episode.
yeah. But I just, that has always been my approach. And if my kids did have an issue with the test, it really wasn't about my students, right? It's about me.
Mhm.
And there are some different things that I need to do in order to make sure that they are, hitting their benchmarks and everything like that. I am not anti-testing. I'm just anti what we do with the testing. And so yeah, so we can go on and on about
We
this, but I'm
could.
going to ask you our final question, which is, in one sentence, what does cultivating brilliance require of us as leaders?
I think as leaders, we have to give teachers permission to cultivate brilliance.
Mm, mm,
They
that's
don't know
good.
that they can deviate from a
Mm.
pacing guide, which, by the way, I hate.
I
I hate
So you
pacing
all you
guides,
all will learn there are two things that we will apply the word hate to: pacing guides and worksheets.
worksheets.
We hate pacing guides and we hate worksheets.
Yes. And
You
there's
will
a
hear that
lot
again.
of research to support and to back
Yes.
us up, and we
Yeah.
will argue you down if you
Yes. Yes,
disagree
we
with
will.
us.
Yes, we will. Yes. Yes, we will. So
But
bring
Erica,
what you
I
want
want to
to.
Right. I want to flip that question to you though. Like, so for, when you think about in one sentence, what does cultivating brilliance require of us as leaders? What do you say to that?
Cultivating brilliance requires us as leaders to realize our role in service. We we serve it in service to teachers and students.
Hmm.
So I always, as a teacher, I always struggled with the administrator or the leader who did not kind of see themselves as supporting me. Like I needed support in the classroom, so I needed resources or things that I need, or even some direction, but that was a support for me. And so there is a role of support and service that leaders have in order for teachers to be effective and also for kids too. So, there's a term servant leaders.
Yes.
To me, that is the ultimate. If you want to cultivate brilliance, you must see yourself as a servant leader.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's my, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I really enjoyed this
Me
conversation. There's
too.
so much we can talk about
There
along the
is.
lines of
There
this
is. We'll have to
topic.
do this again. We'll have to do this again.
We absolutely will do this again because there's a
Yes,
lot to say, but we're going to
there
do this
is.
with other guests
We
who
are.
are already excited. We are excited about bringing on the show so that you can hear their perspectives and their experiences. And we've got some brilliant guests
We
coming.
do.
Brilliant. So
We
excited.
do. We are.
The next episode, we are going to have the one and only,
There's only one.
there's only one, Principal Kafele. Baruti Kafele, who is a good friend of ours, an amazing leader. He is internationally renowned.
Yeah,
If you haven't heard his name, you need to know his name. He's
absolutely.
coming to join us in our next episode. And so stick with us. And we're so happy to have had you. Go ahead,
Yes,
Erica.
yes,
There's
yes,
some words you got to
yes.
say. Go ahead.
Yes, I know. We just want to thank you for joining us on this episode of the Nurturing Greatness podcast. Thank you for joining us. If this conversation challenged you or affirmed you or gave you something practical to implement, please share it with a colleague and join our
Please.
Nurturing Greatness movement.
Join the movement. Visit
Yeah.
nurturinggreatness.info to join the movement that Erica is referencing and explore our services, our upcoming events, and resources designed to support your nurturing greatness. And follow us on our social media. Until
Mm.
next time, keep nurturing greatness.
Yeah.